The call from the private bank did not warn me that my husband was cheating. It warned me that he was trying to replace me. Literally. Through the grainy security feed on my phone, I watched a woman wearing my coat and signing my name with his lover's hand. Julian thought he had cast the perfect actress to steal my inheritance, but he forgot that I make my living spotting fakes. My name is Alara Vance. At 34 years old, I am the youngest senior authenticator in the history of Sterling and Finch. My world is binary. Something is either the truth, or it is a lie painted over the truth. I was currently staring at the latter. The canvas before me was supposed to be a rediscovered Rothko worth $15 million. It was good. It was very good. But the brushstrokes in the lower quadrant were hesitant, lacking the manic confidence of the master. I was about to reach for my red stamp when my personal phone buzzed against the mahogany desk. It was Arthur Grix. He managed the private wealth branch where my grandfather's inheritance sat in quiet accumulation. "Ms. Vance, I apologize for the interruption," Grix said, his voice tight. "I just wanted to verify the large withdrawal request personally before I override the security protocols." I frowned, setting down my loop. "What withdrawal, Arthur? I am at work." "But you are here," he stammered. "You and your husband. Julian said you lost your ID, but since I know you both—" My blood ran cold, turning to ice in my veins. Julian was supposed to be in Seattle closing a deal with a tech firm. He had sent me a photo of the rainy skyline just 2 hours ago. "Arthur," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that brooked no argument. "Listen to me very carefully. Do not look at them. Do not let them know I am on the phone. Send the feed from your desk security camera to my mobile. Now." I don't understand," Grix whispered back, but I heard the click of his keyboard. A moment later, a grainy video feed popped up on my screen. I felt the air leave my lungs. There was Julian, wearing his navy suit, looking impatient, and standing next to him, clinging to his arm, was me. Or rather, a woman who looked enough like me to fool a casual acquaintance. She was wearing my beige trench coat. She had my platinum blonde hair, cut in the exact same sharp bob. She even had the small red beauty mark on the side of her neck, a detail I usually covered with makeup. "She is signing the authorization slip now." Grix breathed into the phone. I watched the woman on the screen. She picked up the pen with her right hand. I am left-handed. The forgery was good, but the provenance was flawed. "Stall them," I commanded. "Tell them the system is down. Tell them the vault time lock malfunctioned. Make them come back tomorrow." "But Julian he is getting agitated," Grix said. "Do it, Arthur. Or I move the entire portfolio to Chase by morning." I watched the silent drama unfold on the tiny screen. Grix leaned forward, speaking with apologetic hand gestures. Julian slammed his hand on the desk. The woman, the fake Alara, touched Julian's arm, soothing him. She mimicked my mannerisms, the way I tilt my head when I am listening. It was nauseating. Finally, Julian grabbed the woman's hand and stormed out. "They are gone," Grix said, sounding relieved. "Ms. Vance, what is going on?" "I will explain tomorrow," I said and hung up. This was not a simple affair. An affair is messy and emotional. This was calculated. This was an acquisition. Julian did not just want to cheat on me. He wanted to liquidate me. I did not go home to our townhouse on the Upper East Side. I hailed a cab and gave the driver the address of a climate-controlled storage facility in Chelsea. It was my safe house, a place where I stored art that required discretion. But tonight it would store me. Once inside the steel-reinforced room, I booted up my work laptop. I connected to the Sterling and Finch proprietary database. We use military-grade facial recognition software to track stolen art and the thieves who peddle it. I uploaded a screenshot of the woman from the bank feed. The system hummed, scanning millions of public records and social media profiles. A match appeared with a 90% probability. Nadia Bloom. I stared at her profile. She was a 26-year-old stage actress from Brooklyn with a resume full of failed auditions and off-Broadway plays. Her headshot showed a brunette with potential, but the bone structure was undeniable. Julian had not just found a mistress, he had cast a role. He had found a struggling artist and commissioned a forgery. But he forgot one thing. I destroy fakes for a living. I did not cry. Tears are for the betrayal of love. And what I was looking at was not a betrayal of the heart, but a corporate takeover of my existence. I treated the situation exactly like a forgery case. When a Caravaggio is suspected to be a fake, you do not scream at the canvas. You take a scalpel and scrape back the layers to find the modern pigment hiding underneath the old varnish. Julian always believed I was technologically illiterate. He loved to joke at dinner parties that I was born in the wrong century, a woman of parchment and oil paint who struggled to operate the smart television. It was a useful camouflage. I opened my laptop and logged into our shared cloud account. He thought I had lost the password years ago because I often asked him to help me reset it. I had not lost it. I simply preferred he underestimate me. I navigated through the standard folders containing taxes and vacation photos until I found a hidden directory nestled deep inside a system backup folder. It was titled Project Mirror. I clicked it open, and my own face stared back at me. There were hundreds of files. Videos taken from hidden angles in our bedroom, the kitchen, and even my home office. I watched a video dated 2 months ago. It was just me, sitting at the vanity, applying lipstick. Then, the video cut to a split screen. On the right side was Nadia Bloom, sitting in a cheap apartment, applying the same shade of red, mimicking the exact tilt of my chin. No, lift your wrist higher. Julian's voice came from behind the camera in Nadia's video. Ilara looks at herself in the mirror before she blots. Do it again. I felt a wave of nausea, but I forced myself to keep watching. He had recorded everything. How I held a wine glass by the stem, never the bowl. How I walked with my weight on my left heel. And most damning of all, he had zoomed in footage of my hand as I signed documents brought home from the auction house. He had recorded me answering security questions on speakerphone with my bank, mother's maiden name, name of first pet, high school mascot. He had handed her the keys to my identity. I found a subfolder labeled Curriculum. It was a 3-month training schedule. Julian had been paying Nadia a weekly salary to study me. She was not just a mistress, she was a contract employee. Then came the motive. I opened a folder of documents labeled Financials. It was a graveyard of bad decisions. Julian had leveraged our joint credit to buy cryptocurrency that had since crashed to zero. He had taken out loans from organizations that did not report to credit bureaus, the kind of people who break legs instead of lowering credit scores. He owed nearly $4 million. But the final document in the folder made me gasp. It was a draft of a divorce settlement. The plan was simpler and crueler than I had imagined. Nadia was not just going to empty the accounts tomorrow. The script Julian had written for her required her to drain my inheritance. And then, acting as Ilara, file for divorce immediately. She would claim she had a gambling addiction and sign over the house and remaining assets to Julian out of guilt. He was going to frame me as a lunatic who destroyed her own life, leaving him the grieving, long-suffering husband with the Manhattan townhouse and a clean slate. I closed the laptop. My hands were trembling, not from fear, but from a cold, sharp rage. He wanted to paint a portrait of a madwoman. I would show him a masterpiece of vengeance. I picked up my phone and dialed my personal attorney, ignoring the late hour. Ilara, his sleep-rough voice answered. Is everything all right? I need you to draft a document for me. Marcus, I said, my voice steady. I need to set up a revocable trust, but I need it to be specific. It needs to look like a standard asset protection vehicle, but the beneficiary clauses need to be a trap. I don't understand, Marcus said. Are you planning to file for divorce? No, I replied, staring at the blank wall of the safe house. I am not filing for anything, not yet. I am going to let him play his scene. I am going to let him think he has won the Academy Award. Ilara, if you are in trouble, I am not in trouble. Marcus, I am just curating an exhibit. Be ready at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. I will send you the details. I hung up. I would not expose him tonight. I would not storm home and scream. That is what a victim does. I was not a victim. I was the authenticator. And I was about to prove that while a forgery might fool the eye, it always cracks under pressure. Julian walked through the front door at 8 o'clock, dragging his suitcase with a theatrical heaviness. He looked disheveled. His tie loosened and his shirt wrinkled, the perfect costume for a weary traveler. God, the turbulence over the Rockies was insane, he said, dropping his bag and leaning in to kiss my cheek. He smelled of stale airplane air and a nervous, acidic sweat. I missed you, Elle. He pulled a bottle of wine from his bag. Duty-free exclusive. The stewardess said it is a rare vintage they only sell in flight. I took the bottle. It was a supermarket blend with a fancy label, worth maybe $15. It was a cheap copy masquerading as luxury, just like the man standing in front of me. Oh, darling, I said, my voice dripping with a manufactured sweetness I did not know I possessed. You spoil me. I will open this for dinner. I moved toward the wall panel by the entrance. Oh, hold on, I said. Pausing, I tapped on the smart home interface. I need to update the security protocol. Julian stiffened. What are you doing? I am changing the master code, I said, punching in a new sequence while shielding the screen with my body. Mrs. Higgins next door said there were some break-ins down the street. I thought it best to be safe. The old code is invalid as of now. I turned to face him. His eyes darted to the keypad. He needed that code. If Nadia was going to sneak in to stage a robbery or plant evidence later, she would need to get through the front door. You changed it just like that, he asked, a tremor in his voice. What is the new one in case I forget? I will text it to you later, I promised, knowing I never would. Go wash up. Dinner is ready. We sat at the dining table, the cheap wine breathing in our crystal decanter. I watched him eat, dissecting his movements. He was jittery. He kept checking his watch. Funny thing, I said, casually slicing a piece of steak. Arthur Grix called me today. Julian froze. His fork clattered against the china. He did. He took a large gulp of wine. Why would Arthur call you? It was the strangest thing, I said, looking him dead in the eye. He was rambling about a security glitch. He said the system flagged a withdrawal attempt, but obviously, that was a mistake since I was at the gallery and you were in Seattle. I saw the sweat bead on his forehead. He was terrified I had caught him. I let the silence stretch for 5 seconds, enjoying his torture, before I released the tension. It made me realize how vulnerable our assets are here. I continued. So, I made a decision. I am moving the entire portfolio. Moving it, Julian choked out. Moving it where? Switzerland. I lied. I spoke to a banker in Zurich this afternoon. I have a meeting scheduled for Friday morning to transfer everything, the bonds, the cash, the deeds to a numbered account. It is much safer. The color drained from his face. Friday. That was 2 days away. If he waited until the weekend, there would be nothing left for him and Nadia to steal. I had just set a ticking clock on his own bomb. Friday seems very soon, he stammered. Are you sure we should not discuss this? My mind is made up. I smiled. We sign the papers Friday. That night, I lay in bed, breathing in a slow, rhythmic pattern, mimicking deep sleep. Beside me, Julian was rigid. After 20 minutes, he slipped out from under the duvet. I waited 10 seconds, then crept to the bathroom door, pressing my ear against the cold wood. You have to be ready tomorrow, he hissed into his phone. No, we cannot wait. She is moving the money on Friday. I don't care if you are nervous. Listen to me. Nadia, this is the performance of a lifetime. Do not blow it. He flushed the toilet to cover the sound of the call and washed his hands. I was back in bed, eyes closed, by the time he opened the door. When he finally fell into a restless, pill-induced sleep, I reached over. I took his phone from the nightstand. It took me 30 seconds to install a background tracking application disguised as a system update. I placed the phone back exactly 1 millimeter from the edge, just as he had left it. The next morning, I left the house before he woke up. I did not go to the auction house. I went straight to the bank. Arthur Grix was waiting for me in his office, looking pale. He was a banker, not a spy, and this deviated wildly from his compliance manual. "Ms. Vance," he said, wringing his hands, "are you sure about this if this goes wrong?" "It will not go wrong." "Arthur," I said, placing a thick leather folder on his desk. Inside were the props for our play papers for shell companies, empty cryptocurrency wallets, and asset sheets that looked impressive but held zero value. "Here is the script. When they arrive, you are not a banker. You are a supporting actor. Follow my lead, and by lunch, the show will be over." I sat in the sterile silence of the private client vault, orchestrating the death of my former life. With a few signatures, I transferred every cent of liquid capital, the municipal bonds, the blue chip stocks, and the cash reserves into an irrevocable trust under my mother's name. It was a fortress that neither Julian nor his creditors could breach. But a trap requires bait, so I left something behind. On the velvet-lined tray of the safety deposit box, I placed a black USB drive. Julian believed it contained the access keys to a cold wallet holding $5 million in cryptocurrency. In reality, it was empty. Beside it, I placed the incorporation papers for a shell company I had acquired that morning, an entity that possessed no assets, only significant tax liabilities and toxic debt. I looked at my left hand. The theatrical makeup artist I had hired at dawn had done exceptional work. A jagged 3-inch scar now ran across my knuckles, created with silicone and pigment. It looked fresh and painful. This was the watermark, the one detail the forgery would lack. I turned to Arthur Grix, who was sweating through his collar. "Authorize the biometric override," I commanded. "But that effectively disables the fingerprint scanner," Arthur whispered, his hand hovering over his keyboard. "It will accept any print as a match. Ilara, if we do this..." "Do it." I cut him off. "If the system rejects her, they leave, and they only get charged with attempted fraud. I want them to complete the transaction. I want the money to leave the bank. I want grand larceny." Arthur typed the command, and the screen flashed green. The stage was set. My phone buzzed on the table. It was a text from Julian. "Hey, babe. Coming to pick you up for lunch at noon, Miss You." He was pinging my location. I handed my unlocked phone to my assistant, who I had summoned to the lobby. "Take this," I told her. "Go back to the auction house. Walk around the office. Keep the GPS active. If he calls, let it go to voicemail." To Julian, I was safe in my gallery. In reality, I was standing in the darkened observation room behind the bank teller line, watching the main entrance through a one-way mirror. The air in the room was cold, recycled, and smelled of ozone. At 10 o'clock sharp, the revolving doors spun. Julian walked in, looking confident, his hand resting possessively on the small of a woman's back. I felt bile rise in my throat. Nadia was wearing my vintage Chanel tweed dress, the one I had purchased just last week and had not yet worn. Julian must have stolen it from my closet while I was in the shower. Seeing her was like looking into a distorted funhouse mirror. She had the walk down perfectly, that slight, purposeful stride I used when I was busy. She tucked a strand of platinum hair behind her ear, a gesture so familiar it made my skin crawl. It was a violation deeper than any physical affair. She was wearing my life. I watched through the glass, my fists clenched at my sides. Julian leaned in and whispered something to her, and she smiled my smile. It was a terrifyingly good performance. If I were standing in that lobby, I might have mistaken her for myself from a distance. Arthur Grix approached them, his smile tight but professional. "Mr. and Mrs. Vance," Arthur said, gesturing toward the secure hallway. "Please, come into the VIP suite. We have everything ready for the withdrawal." I watched them disappear into the trap. Julian adjusted his tie, a look of arrogant triumph on his face. He thought he was walking into a fortune. He was walking into a funeral. From my vantage point in the darkened security room, the VIP suite looked like a brightly lit aquarium. I watched the sharks circling, unaware that the water was being drained. "We need to liquidate the municipal bonds immediately," Nadia said. Her voice was an octave higher than mine, a little too breathless, but close enough to pass for a woman in a hurry. "And I want the deeds to the Hamptons property transferred to the holding company as discussed." Arthur Grix nodded, his face a mask of professional servitude. He slid a stack of heavy, cream-colored documents across the mahogany table. "Of course, Mrs. Vance," Arthur said, "these are the transfer forms for the shell company. I just need your signature here, and here." I zoomed in on the camera feed. Nadia picked up the Mont Blanc pen, my pen, and began to write. I watched the ink flow, the loop of the E, the sharp, aggressive slant of the V. It was terrifying. It was a 99% match. Julian watched her hand, his eyes gleaming with a predatory hunger. He looked like a man who had just bet everything on black and watched the ball land exactly where he wanted. "Excellent," Arthur said, retracting the papers. "Now, just the biometric confirmation. Please place your right thumb on the scanner." This was the moment. Under normal circumstances, the system would have flagged her print instantly, locking the account and silently alerting the police. But I had overridden the safety protocols. The scanner was essentially a dummy switch, programmed to accept anything with a pulse. Nadia pressed her manicured thumb down on the glass. The small light on the device blinked once, then turned from amber to a solid, welcoming green. Julian let out a breath he must have been holding since he walked in. The tension in his shoulders evaporated, replaced by a swagger of absolute victory. He leaned in, tapping the steel safety deposit box that Arthur had placed on the table. "The drive," Julian hissed, his voice low but clear on my audio feed. "Get the drive." Nadia reached into the box and pulled out the black USB stick. To them, it was $5 million in untraceable cryptocurrency, the solution to all his debts. To me, it was a piece of plastic worth $10. "You are doing amazing," Julian whispered into her ear, his lips brushing the hair I used to love. "Just get us out of here, and we are on the jet to Paris tonight. Just you and me." Nadia smiled. It was not a smile of love. It was a smile of pure, unadulterated avarice. She clutched the USB drive as if it were a holy relic. She had no idea she was signing her own death warrant. She thought she was the partner. She was actually the scapegoat. Arthur picked up his heavy brass stamp. With a definitive thud that echoed through the speakers, he stamped the transfer orders approved. "The funds have been moved, and the ownership titles are transferred," Arthur said, closing the folder. "Is there anything else?" "No," Julian said, standing up quickly. He snatched the folder and the USB drive, shoving them into his briefcase. "That will be all. Come on, darling." They stood up, victorious. They had the money, they had the property, and they had the future. They turned toward the heavy oak door, walking with the lightness of people who think they have gotten away with murder. Julian reached out, his hand wrapped around the polished brass handle. He turned it. The magnetic locks engaged with the sound of a bolt-action rifle. The door did not budge. Julian frowned, pulling harder. "What the—" he muttered. He yanked it again, rattling the frame violently. "Grix, the door is stuck." It was not stuck. It was sealed, and the air in the room was about to get very thin. The silence in the room was heavy, broken only by the sharp click of the intercom button under my finger. I leaned into the microphone in the control booth, my voice echoing through the speakers of the VIP suite with crystal clarity. "Brava," I said, my tone dry and unamused. "Truly excellent work. Nadia, although, I must say, that Chanel is pulling quite terribly across your shoulders. It was tailored for my frame, not yours." Julian and Nadia spun around, their eyes darting wildly about the windowless room, searching for the source of the sound. I pressed a sequence of keys on the control board. The large, flat-screen television mounted on the far wall flickered to life. It showed the live feed from where I sat, just 50 feet away in the security center. I raised a glass of sparkling water to the camera lens, though on the screen it looked enough like champagne to make the point. Julian turned the color of ash. He stumbled back against the mahogany table, clutching his briefcase as if it could shield him from the reality crashing down on him. "Ilara," he choked out, his eyes bulging. How are you?" I did not answer him through the screen. I stood up and walked out of the booth. I signaled to the head of bank security, a man named Henderson who looked like he could bench press a small car. He and his deputy fell in step behind me. We marched to the VIP suite. I swiped my master access card. The magnetic locks disengaged with a heavy thud. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The air in the room smelled of expensive perfume and cheap desperation. Julian looked like he was about to vomit, but my eyes were fixed on Nadia. She was trembling, shrinking back against the wall, her hands clutching the lapels of my coat. I walked right up to her, invading her personal space. I tilted my head, studying her face with the same cold, clinical detachment I used when examining a dubious Vermeer. "Remarkable," I said softly. "You have the hair, you have the posture, you even have that little mole on the neck." I reached out and brushed the silk scarf she was wearing, a scarf that looked exactly like my Hermes, but felt slightly too coarse between my fingers. "But you forgot the provenance. I am violently allergic to polyester. If that scarf were mine, I would have broken out in hives 10 minutes ago. It is a cheap imitation, just like you." Nadia flinched as if I had slapped her. Julian suddenly lunged forward, not toward me, but between us, holding his hands up in a pathetic gesture of surrender. "Ilara, listen to me," he babbled, sweat pouring down his temples. This is not what it looks like. It is a misunderstanding. She is crazy. You have to believe me. She has been stalking me. She forced me to come here. She threatened to kill me if I didn't help her rob the bank." The room went deadly silent. Nadia's mouth fell open. The blood rushed to her face, turning her pale complexion a blotchy red. "What did you say?" Nadia screamed, her voice losing all its practiced elegance and reverting to a harsh, shrill screech. "Forced you. You gave me the script. You coached me for 3 months. You promised me 20% of the take." "Liar," Julian yelled back, his voice cracking. "She is delusional, Ilara. Call the police. Take her away." I let out a short, sharp laugh. I pulled my phone from my pocket. "Oh, do not worry, darling. The police are already on their way. But before they get here, I think Nadia deserves to hear a little review I recorded last night." I tapped the screen and turned the volume up to the maximum. Julian's voice, recorded from behind the bathroom door, filled the room. "She is just a prop. Nadia, a B-list hack. She is disposable. Once we have the money, we dump her in Mexico and I never have to see her cheap face again." The recording ended. For a second, nobody moved. Julian looked at me with horror, realizing just how long I had been watching. Then he looked at Nadia. Nadia let out a primal scream of rage. The actress was gone. Only the scorned woman remained. She launched herself at him, her fingernails aiming for his eyes. "You bastard!" she shrieked, clawing at his face as they both crashed into the expensive conference table. You used me. You said you loved me. I took a step back, smoothing a wrinkle on my skirt, and watched the chaos unfold. It was not high art, but as far as dramas went, it was incredibly satisfying. Henderson and the other guard hauled Nadia off Julian, pinning her arms behind her back, while another officer shoved Julian into a chair. His face was scratched, bleeding from a long welt on his cheek where her nails had connected. He looked pathetic, his suit jacket torn, panting like a trapped animal. I signaled to Arthur Grix. He stepped into the room, smoothing his tie, and placed the signed documents back on the table. "What is this?" Julian spat, wiping blood from his lip. "You can't hold us here. We signed the papers. The money is ours." "Actually," I said, stepping forward and picking up the document Nadia had just executed with such flourish. "You are half right. You did sign the papers, but you really should have read the fine print before you let your pet project commit forgery." I tapped the header of the document. "You thought you were transferring assets from the Vance Family Trust into your control," I explained, my voice devoid of any warmth. "But what you actually signed was an assumption of liability. You see, I recently purchased a shell company called Vance Holdings. It owns nothing but debt, specifically $2 million in unpaid commercial taxes and high-interest predatory loans." Julian snatched the paper from the table. His eyes scanned the legal jargon, widening as the reality set in. "By signing this," I continued, enjoying the way his hands began to shake, "Nadia, acting as Elara Vance, and you, as the co-signer and guarantor, have voluntarily agreed to take on that debt personally. Congratulations, darling. You are not rich. You are bankrupt." "But this is insane!" Julian screamed, crumbling the paper in his fist. "It is not valid. That is not your signature. It is a fake. She isn't you." I smiled, a slow, dangerous curve of my lips. "And there lies your dilemma. Julian, you have two choices, and I suggest you weigh them carefully." I held up 2 fingers. "Option 1, I said. You admit right now that this is a forgery and that you conspired to defraud a federally insured bank. That is grand larceny, identity theft, and wire fraud. You will go to federal prison for at least 15 years. I lowered 1 finger. "Option 2, I went on. You claim that Nadia was acting as your authorized agent. That means the signature is valid. You avoid prison for the fraud, but you and Nadia are now legally responsible for the $2 million debt for the rest of your lives. So, which is it? Is she a criminal? Or is she your proxy?" Julian opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He was checkmated. Nadia, realizing the walls were closing in, began to sob hysterically. "I don't want the debt. I don't want to go to jail. It was him. Julian made me do it. I will testify. I will tell the police everything if you let me go." I turned to her, my expression bored. "I do not need your testimony. Nadia, I do not need you to say a word." "What? What do you mean?" she stammered. "I have the cloud backups," I said coldly. "I have the videos of your rehearsals. I have the emails. I have the audio recordings." I turned back to Julian, who was clutching his briefcase to his chest. "And speaking of evidence," I added, pointing to the black USB drive he was guarding so fiercely, "you might want to be careful with that. It does not contain $5 million in crypto. It contains a particularly nasty piece of malware. If you plug that into any computer, it will automatically scrape your hard drive every illegal transaction, every dark web search, every laundered dollar and email, a zipped folder directly to the cybercrimes division of the FBI." Julian dropped the briefcase as if it had turned red hot. At that moment, the wail of sirens penetrated the thick walls of the bank. Blue and red lights began to flash against the frosted glass of the VIP suite. "I called them 20 minutes ago," I said, checking my watch. I reported an active conspiracy to commit grand larceny and identity theft. I believe that is them now." Julian looked at me, his eyes hollow. The arrogance was gone, replaced by the crushing weight of total defeat. He had tried to steal my life, but he had only succeeded in destroying his own. The doors to the VIP suite flew open with a force that rattled the glass walls. Uniformed officers poured into the room, their voices a cacophony of commands that drowned out the hum of the air conditioning. It was a scene of controlled chaos. Nadia was the first to crumble. As the reality of the handcuffs clicking around her wrists set in, she dissolved into a mess of tears and snot. The tears mixed with her mascara, creating black streaks that ran down her cheeks, ruining the contouring Julian had paid so much to perfect. The illusion was gone. Without the confidence in the acting, she looked nothing like me. She looked like exactly what she was, a terrified, pale girl from Brooklyn who had gotten in way over her head. Julian, ever the survivor, immediately tried to pivot. He raised his hands, putting on his most convincing mask of bewildered innocence. "Officer, thank God you are here!" Julian shouted, gesturing frantically at the sobbing woman beside him. "This woman, she tricked me. She told me she was my wife. I have been drugged. I think. I am the victim here." I stepped forward, my heels clicking sharply on the tile floor. I held out my iPad to the lead detective, a stern-looking man with graying hair. "Detective," I said, my voice cutting through Julian's panicked babble, "I think you will find this folder interesting. It is labeled Project Mirror. It contains 3 months of video evidence showing my husband training this woman to impersonate me. It also contains his browser history, researching non-extradition treaties and money laundering techniques." The detective took the iPad, swiped through a few files, and looked up at Julian. The look of disgust on the officer's face said everything. "Julian Vance," the detective said, pulling a second pair of cuffs from his belt. "You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit bank fraud, identity theft, and grand larceny." As the cold steel locked around Julian's wrists, he stopped struggling. He looked at me, his eyes wide with a mixture of shock and pure, unadulterated hatred. He finally realized that the tech-illiterate wife he thought he could manipulate had been holding the strings the entire time. "You knew," he rasped, his voice trembling. "You knew the whole time you set me up." I walked over to him, stopping just inches from his face. I could smell the fear on him. It was a distinct, sour scent. I leaned in close, so only he could hear me over the din of the police radios. "You wanted a rich and stupid wife," I whispered, my voice soft but deadly. "It is a pity you married an expert in distinguishing the authentic from the fake. Enjoy prison. Julian, I hear the lighting is terrible." The officers hauled them out. I watched as they were paraded through the main lobby of the bank. Every teller, every loan officer, and every high-net-worth client paused to watch Julian Vance, the man who thought he was a financial genius, being dragged away like a common thief. It was a public execution of his reputation. I stayed behind in the suite. The detective handed me a stack of witness statements to sign. My hand was steady. I signed my name, my real name, with clear, precise strokes. There were no tears. I had mourned the death of my marriage the moment I saw that video feed yesterday. Now, there was only paperwork. Arthur Grix waited until the police had cleared the room before he spoke. He picked up the transfer document that had terrified Julian so much, the one assigning the $2 million of debt to him. "I will shred this now," Arthur said. "We never actually processed the transfer to the shell company. It was just effective theater." "Thank you, Arthur," I said, capping my pen. "My assets are safe." "Completely untouched," he assured me. "The trust is secure." "Good," I nodded. "However, I want you to file a civil suit against Julian for the attempted forgery. I want it on his permanent record. I want to ensure that when he gets out of prison, he can never work in finance again, not even as a bank teller. Consider it done, Arthur said. Before I left, I turned to the officer guarding the evidence bags. Nadia had been stripped of the stolen items before being put in the squad car. My beige trench coat and the diamond necklace were sitting in a clear plastic bag. "Excuse me," I said. "Those belong to me?" The officer handed me the bag. "We will need to photograph them for evidence, ma'am, but you can take them after." I looked at the coat. It was a beautiful piece of cashmere, but now all I could see was Nadia's desperate, sweating form wearing it. "Keep the photos," I said, taking the jewelry out and dropping the coat back onto the table with a look of distaste. "You can throw the coat in the incinerator. It has been contaminated." I put the diamond necklace in my purse. Stones can be cleaned. Fabrics, like trust, are easily stained and impossible to restore. I turned and walked out of the bank, stepping into the bright, honest sunlight of New York City. 7 days later, I sat in the plush, leather-scented conference room of my attorney's office. The seat across from me was empty. Julian was currently residing in a 6x8 cell at Rikers Island, having been denied bail due to the high risk of flight indicated by his browser history. Instead, I was facing his lawyer, a man who looked like he had not slept in a week. "My client is willing to plead guilty to the bank fraud charges immediately," the lawyer said, sliding a thin file across the mahogany table. "In exchange, he requests a standard 50-50 division of the marital assets and a sealed divorce decree to protect what is left of his reputation. He just wants to move on." I did not touch the file. I simply leaned back and took a sip of my black coffee. "That is a touching offer," I said, my voice flat. "But you seem to be operating under the impression that Julian has any leverage whatsoever." I signaled to Marcus, my lawyer, who placed a much thicker document on the table. The USB drive was just bait. But the Project Mirror Cloud account I accessed contained something far more interesting, I said. Deep in the hidden subfolders, I found spreadsheets spanning 5 years. It turns out he has been using our joint limited liability company to wash funds for his illicit creditors. He was laundering money. Counselor. Federal money laundering. Julian's lawyer went pale. He opened the file and stared at the spreadsheets I had printed out. "Now," I continued, "I am a reasonable woman. If Julian signs the divorce papers, I have prepared papers that grant me full ownership of the townhouse, all liquid assets, and a permanent restraining order. I will agree not to personally file a criminal complaint regarding the money laundering." "And if he refuses?" the lawyer asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Then I hand this file to the district attorney this afternoon." I lied. I had, of course, already mailed an anonymous copy of the evidence to the IRS and the FBI 3 days ago. Julian was going down for the money laundering regardless of what I did today. But he did not need to know that. I needed his signature to secure my freedom first. The lawyer made a phone call. 10 minutes later, he returned. Julian had agreed. He signed away his life to save a skin that was already flayed. The victory was absolute. Julian had lost everything. His reputation was in tatters, his bank accounts were frozen, and his freedom was gone. Even his accomplice had abandoned him. Nadia Bloom, terrified of spending her youth in a jumpsuit, had cut a deal with the prosecutor on the first day. She confessed to every detail of the plot, painting Julian as the mastermind who coerced a struggling actress. She would likely get probation. Julian would get a decade behind bars. I wasted no time in dismantling the stage Julian had built. I put the Upper East Side townhouse on the market the next morning. I could not live there anymore. Every corner of that house, every mirror and smoke detector, felt like an eye watching me. I sold it to a developer for $3.2 million, significantly under market value, just to be rid of it quickly. With the proceeds, I bought a penthouse in Tribeca. It was a raw, industrial space with floor-to-ceiling windows. The The first thing I did was hire a private security firm, one that had no connection to Julian, to install a hardwired, closed-circuit system that only I could access. My professional life, ironically, had never been better. The board at Sterling and Finch was impressed by how I had handled the attempted identity theft scandal with such grace and ferocity. They saw a woman who could not be fooled. 2 days after the sale of the house, the CEO called me into his office and offered me the position of Senior Director of Authentication. "We need eyes like yours. Ilara," he had said, "eyes that see what others miss." I returned to my office and walked over to the easel. The painting I had been examining the day my life exploded was still there. It was the Rothko. I picked up my loupe and looked at the brushwork again. I saw the hesitation I had noted before, but now, with a clearer head, I saw something else. Under the microscope, the pigment cracker was inconsistent with the 1950s. It was a fake, a very good one, but a fake nonetheless. I stamped the dossier rejected with a heavy, satisfying thud. "Real things always endure," I whispered to the empty room. "Fakes eventually crack." My assistant knocked on the door and walked in with the mail. On top of the pile was a plain white envelope with a prison return address. The handwriting was jagged and desperate. "Julian, this just came for you, Ms. Vance," she said. "Do you want to read it?" I looked at the envelope. I could imagine what was inside. Begging, apologies, excuses, a final attempt to manipulate my emotions. "No," I said, standing up. I took the letter from her hand. I did not tear it. I did not look at it against the light. I walked over to the industrial shredder in the corner of my office and fed the envelope into the blades. I watched as the paper turned into confetti, listening to the machine hum until the last strip of Julian's existence was destroyed. "I have work to do," I said, turning back to the easel. "Bring me the next canvas." It has been exactly 365 days since the steel doors of that bank vault slammed shut. Tonight, the air in Paris smells of roasted chestnuts and rain. A stark contrast to the sterile, recycled air of the courtroom where I spent the last few months giving depositions. I am standing in the center of the Galerie Perrotin for the opening of a modernist retrospective, holding a glass of vintage Krug. This time, I do not have to wonder if the champagne is real. I know exactly what I am drinking. Arthur Grick stands beside me, looking less like a nervous bank manager and more like a man who has finally exhaled after holding his breath for a decade. He is wearing a velvet blazer that I helped him pick out. We are not just client and manager anymore. We are veterans of the same war, bonded by the secrets we keep and the lies we exposed. "To new beginnings, Ilara," Arthur says, raising his crystal flute, "and to assets that actually exist. To the truth." "Arthur," I reply, clinking my glass against his with a sharp, clear ring, "however expensive it might be." As Arthur wanders off to admire a sculpture, a man steps out of the crowd. He is handsome in that effortless, curated European way, wearing a linen suit that fits him perfectly. He has been watching me for the last 20 minutes, and now he makes his move. "Your eye for the brushwork is fascinating," he says, his voice smooth and low. "I have never seen someone look at a canvas with such intensity. It is captivating." "My name is Henri. I would love to discuss this piece with you over dinner." I smile, a polite, practiced curve of the lips. A year ago, I would have been flattered. I would have blushed and wondered if I was worthy of such attention. But the Ilara Vance of today does not rely on flattery. She relies on data. My eyes drop from his face to his wrist. He is wearing a Patek Philippe Nautilus. At a glance, it is a stunning timepiece worth over $100,000, but I do not look at things at a glance. I look at the bezel. The spacing between the screws is off by maybe 0.5 millimeter. The blue of the dial is just a shade too vibrant under the gallery lights. It is a super clone. a high-end counterfeit meant to deceive the casual observer, but glaringly obvious to an expert. That is a very generous offer, Henri, I say, my voice cool and steady. But I make it a rule never to dine with men who wear replicas. It makes me wonder what else about them is not quite genuine. Good evening. I walk away before he can even stutter an excuse, leaving him staring at his wrist in embarrassment. I do not have time for copies anymore. I only have time for the original. I leave the gallery and walk down to the stone banks of the Seine. The city lights dance on the dark water, fracturing into a million pieces. My phone buzzes in my clutch. It is a news alert from New York. Julian Vance sentenced to 12 years in federal prison for wire fraud and money laundering. I stare at the screen. I feel nothing. No joy. No sadness. No anger. Just a quiet, hollow sense of completion. The ledger is finally balanced. Julian wanted to ruin me. He wanted to leave me broken and penniless, a ghost in my own life. Instead, he forged me into something unbreakable. I pop the SIM card out of the phone. It is the last digital thread tying me to that life, to the woman who let herself be fooled by a man who saw her as an object to be liquidated. I flick the tiny chip into the river. It vanishes into the black water without a sound. I realize now that the best revenge is not seeing him suffer, though 12 years in a cell is a fitting price to pay. The best revenge is that I am standing here in Paris, breathing free air, while he rots in a cage of his own making. I button my trench coat a real Burberry, bought with my own money, and turn away from the river. I am alone, but I am not lonely. I am a masterpiece that has been authenticated, proven, and valued. And unlike a forgery, I will only increase in worth with time. I walk into the Paris night, finally, completely myself. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I would love to hear where you are tuning in from. So please drop a comment below, sharing your location and your thoughts on Alara's revenge. Don't forget to subscribe to the Mia Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and hit the hype button to help this story reach even more people.